Vitamin D particularly protects us from Good morning, friends. In this video, I'm going to tell you exactly why you should supplement with vitamin D. But before I do, please subscribe to the channel if you're not already, like the video, and comment on the video to help the channel's growth. Now let's get started. This is the first video in my series on vitamin D. The reason why I decided to make a series on vitamin D, although other YouTubers have talked a lot about vitamin D before, is because I've been receiving questions on vitamin D supplementation for the last 2 years on YouTube. Generally, I have avoided answering these questions because of a few issues that we'll get into in this series, including the fact that optimal vitamin D levels are not known for any ethnicity, and deficiency levels are only known for Caucasians or people of European descent, and not people of other ethnicities. Now, this video series will not be comprehensive, and it also won't be very introductory. My goal with this video series is to add value to the discussion on YouTube about vitamin D supplementation. So I'm building on videos that other people have made before. If you haven't seen introductory videos on vitamin D, I would highly recommend you visit Dr. Rhonda Patrick's page or Dr. Chris Masterjohn's page. Now, what I think I'm going to do is post one of these videos every day in the morning for a few days before I let the playlist rest. And in the future, when I make future videos on vitamin D, I'll add them to the playlist. If you want to find the playlist, just visit my playlist section on my YouTube channel, Leo and Longevity. You'll find a playlist called the Vitamin D series, and there you'll get updated on any videos I make in the future on vitamin D. Oh, I'd also like to mention, there are over 200 citations already in this series, and I've only mostly dealt with the ethnic issues in relation to vitamin D status, deficiency, and optimality. So there are going to be a lot of citations here. I plan not to make blog posts with the citations just because it's a bit arduous for me, but instead what I'm going to do is screenshot every citation when I mention it. So if you hear me mentioning something and see a paper come up on the video screen, that means that that paper contains the evidence for what I'm stating. Also, I'll post the citations in a comment that will be pinned to the comment section of each of these videos. Now, with all of those introductory remarks said, let's begin with this video. Beginning with the history of vitamin D. Vitamin D was first discovered in the early 20th century, during the time in which a lot of scientists were discovering vitamin. In particular, it was discovered with reference to the nutritional deficiency disease called rickets. Rickets used to be called the English disease because it was so common in the United Kingdom. It did not have a known cure until Edward Mallenby in the early 20th century began researching the effects of rickets in dogs. In particular, what he did was he noticed there was a lot of rickets in Scotland. So he fed dogs a Scottish diet and also kept them a little bit more away from the sun to mimic the environment in Scotland. And he found that he could reliably reproduce rickets. By the way, rickets is sort of a softening of the bones. It's skeletal issues. So he could reliably reproduce rickets in these dogs. Later, Mallenby discovered that if he fed these dogs cod liver oil, he could reverse the rickets. So he concluded that it must be vitamin A or a deficiency of vitamin A that's causing rickets. Thankfully, the prolific Elmer McCullum correctly identified the vitamin as being not vitamin A, but another vitamin which he termed vitamin D. Vitamin D is mainly produced in our skin through the transformative effects of UV radiation from the sun, which transforms a cholesterol precursor into vitamin D through a couple of steps in our skin. But we also consume vitamin D as a food. The reason why vitamin D is called a vitamin, by the way, the definition of a vitamin is a nutrient that in its absence, a clear disease commonly occurs among humans. So for example, with vitamin A deficiency, you get blindness at night. With vitamin C deficiency, you get scurvy. With vitamin D deficiency, you get rickets. That's why it's called a vitamin, just because in its absence, a disease almost always happens in humans. However, it's not really a vitamin. Vitamin D is a hormone. It is a primary regulator in the transcription of thousands of genes in a cell-specific manner. So really, we should think of vitamin D as not just another vitamin, but really a hormone that comes from the sun. Now, in this video, we're going to discuss two aspects of vitamin D supplementation. In particular, how vitamin D is associated with immune function and how vitamin D protects us from certain cancers in particular. But the reason why I wanted to talk about the inflammation and then the cancer in that order is because vitamin D's modulation of our immune system may have a role in its ability to protect us from cancer. To begin, vitamin D is immunomodulatory, meaning it modulates the activity of your immune system. Part of the activity that it modulates is the activity of T regulator cells, called Tregs. T regulator cells are some of the cells that protect you from autoimmune diseases. Also, vitamin D levels are consistently associated inversely with markers of chronic inflammation, and also particularly with C-reactive protein, such that among a population, those with higher vitamin D levels have less symptoms of chronic inflammation. Their immune system is attacking their bodies slightly less. Now, speaking of autoimmune diseases, fascinatingly, autoimmune disease incidence is higher at northern latitudes in the world, where people have less exposure to the sun. For example, type 1 diabetes incidence, irritable bowel disease, as well as multiple sclerosis, all have higher incidence at northern latitudes. In fact, with multiple sclerosis, in cities or locations in which there's seasonal variation, even the birth month is associated with incidence of multiple sclerosis. That's how much the weather impacts this. And there are reasons for us to think that the difference in latitude affects people's autoimmune conditions through vitamin D. For example, the vitamin D receptor has polymorphisms that are associated with multiple sclerosis, type 1 diabetes, and rheumatoid arthritis. In fact, supplementation with vitamin D in childhood can reduce type 1 diabetes incidence by up to 30%. And vitamin D intake from food is inversely associated with rheumatoid arthritis development. For those that don't know, arthritis is also an autoimmune condition in which your immune system is attacking your joints, essentially. And vitamin D supplementation can improve intestinal permeability in Crohn's disease and can reduce disease activity in Crohn's disease, which is an irritable bowel kind of disease. It can reduce disease activity there. Also, vitamin D supplementation can reduce disease activity in lupus. So vitamin D seems to have a potent protective effect against autoimmune conditions. Now, as some of you know, autoimmune disease is much more common in women than men. And there is some indication that vitamin D supplementation may be even more protective in women against autoimmune conditions than in men, due to crosstalk between estrogen and vitamin D metabolism. Next, vitamin D's modulation of the immune system may be one of the reasons that it's so protective against cancers. For those that don't know, your immune system is what your body relies on to surveil, catch, and kill cancers before they grow. Now, if you look at the most recent meta-analyses on vitamin D supplementation, not vitamin D from food or from sunlight, or not vitamin D levels, but supplementation, you'll find that vitamin D supplementation does not improve all-cause mortality. And it particularly does not improve cardiovascular mortality, meaning it doesn't make people live longer generally or make them live longer from heart disease. But it dramatically improves the survivability of having cancers. By the way, why might this be? Why wouldn't you see an effect on all-cause mortality if you have an effect on cancer mortality and not an effect on cardiovascular mortality? Well, the reason is because of statistical issues. So you may not have as powerful an effect on the inhibition of cancer such that it's visible on the all-cause mortality. So don't get too bogged into the details there. But what's important to know is that cancer mortality is reduced from vitamin D supplementation. So vitamin D supplementation reduces cancer mortality. But does it also reduce the incidence of cancer? Meaning, when you supplement with vitamin D, are you less likely to develop a cancer, or are you more likely to defeat the cancer? Well, a 2021 meta-analysis and also a 2021 review of observational studies indicate that it is most likely the case that vitamin D supplementation prevents cancer mortality, but does not improve cancer incidence, such that you may be as likely to develop a cancer, but much more likely to survive it if you supplement with vitamin D. And finally, the last point of this video, vitamin D protects us from cancer, but it particularly protects us from colorectal cancer. The real reason for most people to supplement with vitamin D is to avoid colorectal cancer. In fact, vitamin D is so protective for colorectal cancer that it even reduces the incidence of colorectal cancer. So for people that have higher vitamin D levels, they have a 50% reduced incidence of colorectal cancer as compared to people with the lower levels of vitamin D. And both intake of vitamin D nutritionally as well as vitamin D levels are both associated inversely with the incidence of colorectal cancer. So vitamin D supplementation reduces the likelihood that people get colorectal cancer, but it also improves the likelihood of them surviving that cancer. And if they do survive the cancer and have higher vitamin D levels after it, they are much less likely to have a reoccurrence. Now, how is vitamin D so protective against colorectal cancer in particular? This may be a subject for another future discussion. But vitamin D does modulate microbiome activity, and there are VDR, vitamin D receptor polymorphisms, that are specifically associated with colorectal cancer. Now, let's review what we learned here. Vitamin D is a hormone, not really a vitamin, and it regulates thousands of genes in our body. Vitamin D particularly protects us from autoimmune diseases and improves the function of our immune system. That's one of the main reasons to supplement with vitamin D. But the most powerful reason to supplement with vitamin D is to protect yourself from cancers, in particular colorectal cancer. Now, how to supplement with vitamin D is a little bit more of a complex issue. We're gonna get into that in future videos, beginning with a video tomorrow morning. Anyway, friends, thank you so much for bearing with me. I'll see you again this afternoon.